The Assembly will hear an address by His Excellency Xavier Espot Zamora, Head of Government of the Principality of Andorra. I request protocol to escort His Excellency. I have great pleasure in welcoming His Excellency Xavier Espot Zamora, Head of the Government of the Principality of Andorra. I invite him to address the Assembly.
Senyor President, Senyor Secretari General, Excel·lències, senyores i senyors.
Mr. President, Mr. Secretary General, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to start my statement by congratulating His Excellency Ambassador of Trinity and Tobago, Dennis Francis, for his election to the presidency of the General Assembly, and His Excellency Xavier of Hungary, who in an international context which is difficult has maintained the effectiveness and the rigor of the activity of the Assembly since the 77th session. We thank you, Mr. President, for the leitmotif that you chose, which is rebuilding trust and reigning global solidarity, accelerating action in the 2030 Agenda and the Sustainable Development Goals towards peace, prosperity, progress, and sustainability for all. We make it our own because it fully corresponds to the principles with which Andorra works, both from a political point of view domestically and from the point of view of international policy. And you can count, Mr. President, on the loyal support of our country, Andorra, for this 78th session, and we wish you many successes. Just a few weeks before the holding of this general debate, the Secretary General of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres, launched a new appeal to countries for them to take radical and urgent action because, as he warned us, and I quote, "The era of global warming has ended. The era of global boiling has arrived. Climate change is here. It is terrifying, and it is just beginning." There is no rationalizing nor denying the evidence. Greenhouse gas emissions have been caused by unrestrained consumption of natural resources and led our planet to exhaustion, which was never more obvious than this summer. Extreme temperatures led to more than 61,000 deaths in Europe in 2022. The wave of fires on the North American continent and the Mediterranean continent, or the phenomenon El Niño, are all habitual phenomena which dry the world, make the land less arable, and push the people to abandon their place of origin because the degradation of the environment have made them climate refugees and condemned them to living far from their homes. We humans are guilty of climate change, and that is why the solutions to stop it will not come from nature itself, which we are degrading, but from our capacity to change our production model and organization of our societies. It's late to avoid the consequence, which is, unfortunately, they are already irreversible. But to slow them and to prevent global temperatures from increasing more than 1.5 degrees between now and the end of the century. And to that end, indeed, we need huge transformations, economically and socially, because fighting climate change and becoming aware of what is needed is not just a scientific matter or a technocratic matter anymore to be left in the hand of experts. It's rather a political issue, social, economic in nature, even ethical or philosophical, which allows us to see the enormous inequalities in our world. And thus, it is our conviction that solutions are to be found in a new form of multilateralism that is more geared towards collective action and stronger than ever. These solutions must strengthen and contribute to reconstructing international cooperation with the view to providing adequate resources in those regions that need them and promoting inclusive governance and coordinated and solidarity-based policies. And it is here, ladies and gentlemen, in the United Nations that we must identify the crises and take positions, take action, and undertake clear commitments in favor of the common good. We must, more than ever, support and remember the original values of this body and this organization, born of the ruins of war, which was the most devastating in history. This is an organization in the service of peace, dialogue, and multilateralism, which was destined to prevent the scourge of war. And yet, war is here. Europe is worried about a conflict which ended up becoming a war that is unending and with enormous consequences for the Ukrainian civilian population. From our country, we energetically condemn this violation of territorial integrity and sovereignty of Ukraine. We have supported, amongst other things, the declarations of this General Assembly, the positions set forth by various bodies such as the Council of Europe, international sanctions, and especially those of the European Union. Yemen, Pakistan, Ethiopia, and Sahel, and other territories are no longer on the news as front-line stories. And yet these areas are areas of frozen conflicts where people are more than ever fragile and are the main victims. Andorra contributes to supporting the most vulnerable, especially men, women, and children, through UNICEF programs, the International Red Cross, and their courageous work in the field. Throughout all of these years, the African continent has never stopped being a source of concern, with breaks in democracy in many states from east to west, often under a terrorist threat. In the month of last July, we commemorated the 25th anniversary of the adoption of the Rome Statute Act, which was the founding act of the International Criminal Court. This event serves as a powerful reminder of the imperious need to promote justice for all victims of war crimes, crimes against humanity, genocide, and violations of human rights. And it is armed with this conviction that Andorra was, amongst other European microstates and with civil society, standing firm with NGOs and was key in creating the International Criminal Court and would like to continue to do so in order to further strengthen that body. Mr. President, this year, representing my country within the General Assembly is more important and unique than ever. On the 28th of July last, Andorra celebrated the 30th anniversary of its accession to the United Nations as the 184th member state. The adoption of the Andorran Constitution in 1993 made it possible to obtain international recognition and to make our voice heard beyond our borders and to align ourselves with international law. And if I may, in the context of commemorating that very event, a very important event for all citizens of Andorra, I'd like to recall the words of the head of state of our government, Oscar Ribes-Recht, that he said from this very rostrum, now 3 decades ago, about the way a small country can contribute to improving this world. And he said, "We are a small state, but we are aware of the value of what is authentic. And in a world that is out of dimension and proportion, the small size can mean something in terms of contributing balance and coexistence. What should the ideal size of a state be? Obviously, it's neither the economy nor the political science that can bring a response to this question. Aristotle noted in his work, Politics, and in his volume, Cities, that policy needs to allow the world to understand the nature of others. The territory, as he said, should be contemplated completely from the very summit of a mountain all the way through. Andorra responds to these human and geographic characteristics that he mentioned. And it is from this human perspective of value, of what is authentic, of freedom, that it's worthwhile being preserved and benefiting these 750 years of our history being recognized. And it is in that context that we can contribute our knowledge and our commitment to meet the common challenges of our world in the context of multilateralism. Ladies and gentlemen, in the schools and spaces reserved for the children of the Principality of Andorra, there are posters that recall the 17 objectives of sustainable development goals of the 2030 Agenda. And they are in view of all adults, the metaphor of our society, an appeal to children and adults, a reminder that the time is passing and the future is in our hands. It's a last warning of our responsibility and credibility vis-a-vis accelerating the process to go further, to reformulate current structures and make progress towards creating financial governance, technology, environmental governments. based on sustainability, cooperation, and equality for our young people in the future. The Agenda 2030 is a roadmap. It's a universal one that leads us to the future of the planet for more sustainable societies that are more resistant. The commitment of Andorra in accomplishing these goals is firm, as seen in the presentation of our voluntary reports in follow-up of the SDGs. And this is why Andorra adopted a national strategic plan for implementing the 2030 Agenda, whereby our government's involvement was demonstrated from institutions all the way to Andorran society as a whole in order to work towards the sustainable development of our planet, because that is the only way to achieve our goals and leave no one behind, to construct more fair societies. And from that point of view, we recognize and applaud the work, the untiring work of the Secretary General, Mr. Guterres, and the Presidency of the General Assembly to unite our efforts, because we all have a window of opportunity here to ensure a viable future that's sustainable for everyone. And specifically and concretely, the organization these recent days of the SDG Summit, whereby Andorra participated actively. To achieve these goals, education is necessary as a tool. It's the basis of progress, and it's an accelerator for societies and a fundamental element of personal growth, collective growth, and a guarantee of equality of opportunity, respect, civics, democracy, and the future. Andorra took an active part in the Summit on Transforming Education Summit last year, with the conviction that we can make a contribution by sharing our experience working with UNESCO, UNICEF, and the International Organization of Francophonia in order to implement SDG 4 to guarantee quality education, which is inclusive, equitable, and multilingual, and promote the possibilities of learning throughout life for all young people, because education is one of the greatest advantages for everyone. Andorra attaches specific importance to education, which allows us to propose an elementary formula of excellence for children and young people. 65 different nationalities are involved, all growing in a context of learning fundamental values in democracy, human rights, with a high degree of social cohesion and diversity, and a strong feeling of belonging. Along with education, access to health care is a pillar of any society. And the COVID pandemic was a test of our resistance, and we were able to overcome it in Andorra. We have a sound system due to professionals in healthcare that make it up, that honored the profession by making a considerable effort to save the people. We must also underscore the World Health Organization's role, this year celebrating its 75th anniversary. 74 years devoted to fighting disease that threatens the very existence of some countries. Not all epidemics have the name of COVID-19, and to grapple with structural inequalities in terms of access to health care or physical or mental health that the people must deal with. Gender equality is a subject of historical social injustice. We cannot, of course, change the past, but we can take action to progress towards a more egalitarian society, because if we want to achieve the necessary transformation for the sustainability of our planet, we cannot leave anyone behind in humanity. And in that regard, in recent years, our country has made gender equality and non-discrimination one of its key values, and has created pioneer legislation which is bold and ambitious to defend gender equality. And it is being taught in our schools. Education of girls and training of women is a major priority for us, and also is very important in the context of our international cooperation. Andorra is a country of high mountains, especially sensitive to climate change, which unfortunately is threatening our biodiversity, our water cycle, and even our our way of life. Given the geographic specificity of our territory in the Pyrenees, we are very active members of the Mountain Partnership, and we have advocated for the Aspen Declaration to be included, to include a specific mention of the Pyrenees, as has happened for other mountainous regions. We have advocated for the particular vulnerability of mountainous regions throughout the world, that they should enjoy specific attention in international fora in fighting climate change. This is a battle that can only be won if we focus specifically on energy transition and meet the challenges of the world that each country needs to meet. responding clearly to international and national commitments towards our citizens in order to achieve carbon neutrality. Andorra's accession as a member of the Coalition for Carbon Neutrality allows us to learn and to share our experiences with other member states. We were pioneering in establishing a green tax of 30 euros per ton of carbon or coal, which allows us to make progress towards a more sustainable world. We adopted a circular economic law which sets the year 2035 as our goal in order to achieve a production model for dealing with most of the waste and transform it into subproducts that can be reintroduced in the chain of production, with a special mention for fighting against waste of resources and specifically food waste. And we've also set up a system of generalized gratuity for public transportation to aid families with fewer resources. Mr. President, we are a state which seeks to adapt to the European Union because we cannot get around this one certainty. Geographic interdependence and demographic interdependence of our country with Europe is complete. Europeanization of our values of our society, our legislation, are a strong inspiration of community law and professional aspiration for our young people, who every day in the labor market, which is more and more demanding, are all reasons which are sufficient to push us to not turn our backs on Europe. Similarly, it is key to continue working to defend the values of multilateralism, such as human rights, democracy, and the rule of law. They have helped us to promote peace and security throughout the European continent, such as in the rest of the world. Excellencies, we have subjected this planet to a number of different kinds of pressure, and as I said earlier, there is a window of opportunity open right now, but what's also more and more certain is it could close suddenly and brutally. We must take advantage of this era of scientific knowledge, and in that regard, I'd like to highlight the importance of science in helping us to improve our living conditions due to medicine or artificial intelligence. Today, we know a great deal more about the behavior of the atmosphere of Earth, on our interaction with Earth and oceans, and the consequences of water resources and the survival of the species thereof. And this scenario to be followed cannot be a monologue, but needs to be a dialogue amongst all people and for all people. And that's why from our country, we are prepared to seek more than ever points of convergence as necessary to rebuild trust and reigning global security, social solidarity, accelerating action for the 2030 agenda, as I mentioned earlier. The summit of the future that will take place in 2024 for peace, prosperity, progress, and sustainability for all is all the more important in that regard. After almost 8 decades of existence, the United Nations allows us to draw a number of lessons in a number of areas in terms of peacekeeping, fighting climate change, are just a couple of examples. And there are other lessons about common denominators here, and that is that the great challenges for humanity require the participation of all countries and all peoples, because the international community only makes progress by becoming aware of its interdependency and the fact that no country is big enough to grapple with these challenges alone. And we also learned that these solutions, to be fair and sustainable, need to include everyone. They need to lay a sound foundation for the future where no one is left behind or alone. And there is the responsibility of the requirement of sharing responsibility fully. And this is how we, Andorrans, believe that efforts must be focused on achieving the Sustainable Development Goals, strengthening economic institutions, and all aspirations of the international community which have resounded throughout this General Assembly. You know that you can count on Andorra to continue making headway together. Thank you very much.
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the head of the government of the Principality of Andorra for the statement just made, and I request protocol to escort His Excellency.